are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is Star-Crossed, the Starr Faithfull case. Now, no one could have ever imagined how dark this woman's past could be, but that would start to catch up to everyone. Unfortunately, that may have included Starr herself. By the way, this is a collab with the brilliant Mollie Westbrook. She is so incredibly professional and does an incredible amount of research on every single one of her true crime videos. I love watching her channel and she is such a sweet soul as well. So I am so excited to be doing this with her. She will be in part of this video today and I will be in a video on her channel as well. And I really recommend you go over there, watch that video, and subscribe and give her so much support. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1931 in New York, and Starr was a 25-year-old American socialite, and she came from a very wealthy family. They had old money from Massachusetts, and pretty much everyone in her family was wealthy. However, Starr was not a happy girl, and we know that money cannot change that. Money does not make you happy, and so she began to be quite the partier, going out all of the time, being with several different men, and also drinking, doing drugs, all of that in her 20s. And by 1931 her body would actually be found, and the entire case would be one of the biggest mysteries. You see, Starr was actually born Marion Starr Wyman on January 27th of 1906 in Evanston, Illinois. And her father, Frank Wyman, was actually an investment banker married to her mother, Helen. Now, they nicknamed Starr Bambi as a child, and when she was only 1, they actually moved to New Jersey. And Starr was a very happy, outgoing, loving little girl. And 4 years later, they would have a second child, who was a girl named Elizabeth, who went by Tucker. Like I said, her mother had come from a very wealthy family. However, the immediate family, her mother's father, had lost their fortune long ago. However, everybody else was very wealthy, and one of the relatives was actually an Andrew J. Peters, who was a well-known politician who was not only in the Senate but also the House of Representatives, and was the Assistant Secretary of Treasury for President Woodrow Wilson. He was also friends with the governor of New York at the time, who was Franklin D. Roosevelt. So as you can tell, he was very, very high up in politics and knew some very influential people. But because the Wymans were struggling with money, the Peters would often give them loans of gifts and money, and even paid for their daughter's schooling at Rogers Hall Academy. And these girls would often go over to the Peters residence, and they would spend weekends there. They would spend the summer. They would go on trips with them. And the Peters were really welcoming of the girls to do whatever they wanted with the family. They didn't, hold money against them or anything. They really welcomed these two girls, Starr and Tucker.
When Starr was 18 years old, her parents actually divorced, and her mother the next year went on to marry a man called Starr Faithfull, which is where Starr got her last name, because the girls changed their last names from Wyman. Stanley's ex-wife had worked for a politician named Leverett Saltonstall, but she had passed. Stanley himself was a self-employed inventor who was unfortunately not very successful. He earned very little money for the family. They did move to West Orange in New Jersey and got a house. However, they later lost this house due to foreclosure, and so they had to move into an apartment. Some people weren't too fond of Stanley, however, and they called him a rat-faced man who would file lawsuits in order to earn some money. And when Starr was 20 years old, she came forward to her parents with a secret she had been keeping for years.
Now, Andrew J. Peters was a well-known and well-respected politician. However, he deserved none of that, because at just 11 years old, he began to sexually assault Starr, who was only 11, and he would often use ether to get her high, which was kind of an equivalent to being intoxicated, so she really didn't have full control of what was happening. And at this point, Starr started wearing male clothing, started to make herself kind of appear more manly, so Andrew would possibly stop doing this. However, this didn't deter him, and it just continued, and Starr's mental health greatly declined at this time, to the point where she would have like an emotional disturbance that was sent her to a psychiatric hospital named the Channing Sanitarium. She was coming forward to her parents now at 20 years old because Andrew was still doing this to her and would often invite her to different parties that he was invited to get her into the like socialite parties, the very fancy, extravagant, filled with rich people where she could possibly find a husband. At least that's what Andrew told her parents. However, he would still be taking advantage of her afterwards. And one evening he even took her to see a movie and there was a storm afterwards, and he called her parents and said, "I'm just gonna get her a hotel so there's no way that we can get in an accident or anything can go wrong with this storm." And she went home to her parents and she admitted everything that had been happening to her since she was 11 years old, including the fact that just the night previous was the first time Andrew actually had sex with her. She was going into grave detail, saying that Andrew even made her read a book from Havelock Ellis, who studied intimacy, and these were basically to tell her how to do things and what to do. But unfortunately, she told her parents this and they didn't seem to care. In fact, they didn't even call the police. You see, they had another plan in mind, and Stanley, her stepfather, went and negotiated an agreement with Andrew, saying that Andrew would pay $20,000 in that time, so even more in this time, for them to keep quiet about all of this, and this would pay for Starr's rehabilitation and any medical needs she had. And this wasn't actually going to stop at $20,000. Stanley was going to pester and push Andrew to pay quadruple that amount of money to keep him silent, and this was the perfect opportunity for the Faithfulls to get their money that they had been lacking for so many years. They were really struggling with it, and now they had an easy way of getting it at the expense of their own daughter's justice. But with that money, they did buy Starr a sex tutor, which was supposed to help her have normal relations after such a traumatic experience. And they also bought her cruises all over the world to get her kind of out of the area, and it was probably more to keep her quiet than anything, but they did pay for those. And so Starr began to drink and party all the time on these cruise ships because that's all she really had to do. And she got used to this life. She would often wait by the ports and get with the ship's officers, and at one point she was even said to be engaged to one. However, he left her in London with no money, saying he didn't actually want to be engaged to her. But she was getting into drugs and of several different kinds and just not taking the best care of herself, and she'd even quit school months before her graduation. But now it was 1931, and this would be the last year that Starr Faithfull would grace this earth. And she had actually that March been taken to the Bellevue Hospital because she had been found beaten and naked and completely drunk in a New York City hotel room under the name Joseph Collins and wife. However, this was with a man she had just met, and this is what had happened to her afterwards, so nobody really knew who that man was. But this hospital visit, this beating, did not stop Starr from her crazy lifestyle. It only made it worse.
There was a man named Dr. George Jameson Carr who had once pumped her stomach on a night out and saved her life. Starr believed he was the love of her life. So on the 29th of May, Starr boarded onto the ship Franconia where he worked and went to his sitting room only to be sent away by George himself. You see, George didn't reciprocate her feelings, and so he left her on the dock of the ship. Except she didn't have a ticket, and so she was escorted off. They had to send her back to the pier on a tugboat, and Starr did not take this well, and she began screaming, "Kill me, throw me overboard." Afterwards though, she wrote a letter to George telling him that she was just too drunk, and that the newspapers saying she was only attempting to stow away and get a free ride were untrue. The only reason that she had to be escorted off was because she was too drunk to do it on her own.
For the next week, Starr continued to socialize and be her normal partying self, even saw some of her family and friends. But on June 4th, she would be put into a taxi in front of the Channing building, and she was completely intoxicated. The driver said she wanted to stop and get some alcohol before going to a house in Flushing, Queens, which was not where she was supposed to go home. And she was actually too drunk to find this place and ended up being dropped off between 33rd Avenue and 163rd Street. That evening, she was said to make it to a party where this was for a famous actress. However, she called this actress a different name of another actress because she was so drunk. She also met 2 of her actor friends there, who were Bruce Winston and Jack Greenway. And the mother said that they were going to be meeting the next day for a hangout, her and her 2 actor friends. She had come home and she had told her mother this. However, this was all a lie because another friend of Starr's came forward and said she wasn't at the party. She was with me at a hotel room. We went to a speakeasy and we drove around in a taxi before heading back to the hotel, and his name was Dr. Charles Young Roberts. However, the next day, Friday, June 5th, this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. Stanley reported her missing and said that morning at around 9:30 a.m. she left the apartment at Luke's place wearing an expensive silk dress as well as hat, gloves, shoes, and stockings, and carrying a purse and a coat. And she also had $3 with her to get her hair waved because she was going to go to a salon. She, in fact, never came back, and Stanley, of course, she reported her as missing this day. However, 3 days later, they still hadn't really looked into it. She still was missing, and he went back into the police department and said, she's still missing. Just wanted to remind you guys to please continue to look into it. And they found that on June 5th, Starr had actually been seen at the 9th Street subway station at around 11:30 a.m. at a vendor who had known her. She had often stopped at this vendor and said she was there that morning, and he recognized her. Then at 1 p.m., a taxi driver who was at the Chelsea Piers said that Starr had gotten in the cab with a man wearing a uniform, one of the ship's uniforms, and she had called him Brucey, and she had said that she would see him again at 4. However, he told her to not come back. Now, this driver said they both rode there together to her house. He dropped Starr off. He didn't really see her go in the house, but then he did take this Brucey back to the piers. However, an hour later, the taxi driver was back at the piers to, of course, pick up more clients when Brucey came walking back with a now drunk Starr, putting her in a cab, telling the taxi driver, take her home and don't bring her back. Now, Starr got in this cab but didn't have enough money for the actual whole ride and got out a few blocks later and began to walk back toward the piers. And at around 2:30 and 3, she was actually seen at a beauty shop at the Grand Central Terminal, and she was asking for an appointment. There was another witness later that day who said that they saw her at a party on the Mauritania ship. However, it was leaving for the Bahamas at 5 p.m. and she got off before it actually left. Dr. Charles Young Roberts was working on the Carmania ship that was nearby, and he said he invited Starr to have dinner with him from like 5:30 to it lasted till 10 p.m. And this whole time she was completely drunk, saying the places she wanted to travel, and by 10 p.m. Dr. Charles put her in a cab, gave her the fare, and sent her back to not her home but another party. Then the investigators turned their attention to find who this Brucey was, who had demanded that she go back home and not come back to the piers, and she had said she had an actor friend named Bruce Winston. However, when police searched, there was no actor named Bruce Winston except for like an elderly British actor who was obviously not him. There was also a gangster who went by Elias Bruce, who they thought this could have been. However, it was looked into and he was ruled out. There was finally David Bruce Blue, who was found later in London, who admitted to being with her that night and really didn't seem to have anything to do with what would happen, her disappearance, and knew anything more than putting her in the cab for the final time. However, after Dr. Charles put her in the cab at 10 p.m., no other taxi driver said that they picked her up after that time. So nobody really knows if she made it to this party, if the taxi driver did anything to her, if she walked home after she got to this party. Nobody really knows. On June 8th, Stanley would go back into the police station and he would find that there was news of a female body that had been found. It was at 6 a.m. by a beachcomber in Long Beach in New York, and a body had washed up from the ocean.
Stanley immediately went to identify her, and she had been found wearing only her Lord and Taylor dress, bright red nail polish, silk stockings, and a girdle that held up her stockings. Everything else was gone, including her underwear. Starr's body had bruises all over, and her cause of death was found to have been drowning, with her body being in the water for 48 hours. However, another expert said that it was only actually 10 hours and closer to the beach because her lungs were filled with sand. Strangely enough, her liver showed that she hadn't actually drank alcohol for 36 hours before her death. However, it did contain a high level of barbiturate, which is a sedative. 4 hours before her death, she had a full meal of meat, potatoes, mushrooms, and fruit. Starr had 2 autopsies done, which actually both differed a bit. One saying that she had been sexually assaulted, whilst the other denying this.
Investigators initially thought that this was a suicide. However, Starr's stepfather Stanley heard of this and immediately said, "Do not tell the news anything. I don't want this to be in the press." However, then he took it to the news himself, saying that the police were being negligent about all of this and that he believed that Starr had been murdered. And then he said by who he believed had done it. And he said everything about Andrew Peters, saying that he had hired someone to kill Starr because he had had sexual relations with her in the past, and basically exposed everything that Andrew had been paying him to keep his mouth shut about. Stanley also said that Starr was a homebody who never went out, never went to parties, never dated anybody, trying to, I guess, make her look better, but it was just kind of strange because everybody knew that that wasn't her. However, Andrew was brought in for questioning and denied everything, denied being with her that night, denied the sexual relations from long ago and even recently, and completely said he had nothing to do with it, didn't know what had happened. But was his sexual relations with her motive enough for murder? And what had happened between June 5th when she was last seen and June 8th? Well, police informants then came forward to police, saying that on June 6th, a woman that kind of resembled Starr was seen arguing at the Taipei Hotel in Island Park with a male. And police were watching this area because it was often a popular spot for mobsters and bootleggers to go and do their business. And so they had seen this woman there arguing with this unknown male. The next day, on June 7th, the Faithfulls had actually written a note to Andrew saying that Starr was missing and also demanding more money. Now, although some did strongly believe that this was a murder case, the evidence of suicide was starting to pile up because Starr had written letters to this Dr. George that she was said to be in love with after being kicked off the ship. And she said things in it like, "I want to end my worthless, disorderly bore of a life," and ending that letter with, "I want oblivion." She said she was depressed and suicidal and wanted his love and was so sad that she couldn't get it. Now, handwriting experts were hired by Stanley to prove that these letters were not written by Starr, and the handwriting experts said that that was true, that they were forged. However, the police didn't agree and didn't listen. Then Starr's diary was found in their apartment after the family said she didn't keep a diary, and it would go into explicit details about the 19 men she had been with, and even more scandalous things that they couldn't even print in the newspapers. She also referred to one of the men as AJP, who was thought to be Andrew J. Peters. However, they still couldn't get him to confess anything. Now, I want to read to you some of the full letters that Starr was said to send to Dr. George Carr, because it definitely does give you a feeling, if this was from her, of what her mind was at the time, and it definitely leans more towards the suicide theory. So one of them said, "I am going, definitely now, I've been thinking of it for a long time, to end my worthless, disorderly bore of an existence, before I ruin anyone else's life as well. I certainly have made a sordid, futureless mess of it all. I hate everything, so life is horrible. I am mad and insane over you. I have, strangely enough, more of a feeling of peace, or whatever you call it now, that I know it will soon be over. The half hour before I die will, I imagine, be quite blissful." And then there was one allegedly sent the day before Starr disappeared to him that said, "It's all up with me now. This is something I am going to put through. The only thing that bothers me about it, The only thing I dread is being outwitted and prevented from doing this, which is the one possible thing for me to do. If one wants to get away with murder, one has to jolly well keep one's wits about one. It's the same way with suicide. If I don't watch out, I will wake up in the psychopathic ward, but I intend to watch out and accomplish my end this time.
After all of this, Andrew J. Peters had suffered a nervous breakdown, and when Starr's remains were cremated, no one ever came forward to claim them because her family didn't have the money. Her sister Tucker said, "I'm not sorry Starr's dead. She's happier. Everyone is happier." Starr's diary was said to have been lost or destroyed through the years. However, some theorized that it was actually given to Andrew J. Peters to be hidden away.
But what do you believe happened? Was it Andrew who wanted to cover up his dark history? Was it Dr. George to make Starr stop being in love with him and stop being obsessed with him? Was it Dr. Charles who possibly fell in love with Starr and she didn't feel the same way back because she loved this other doctor? Was it her parents who wanted more money, more press, and more fame? I think that this poor girl was stuck with a family who didn't care much about her, and this led her to a lifestyle of feeling worthless and not giving herself enough credit. And could that possibly have made her commit suicide? I know most lean towards Andrew being the killer here, but it had also been years after they had first come forward with this settlement and, threats that they would out him. And if he was going to kill somebody, wouldn't it be the entire family, considering Stanley was the one who was asking for more money, and it still didn't matter if Starr was passed away because Stanley would still be the one who would be asking for it and could still come forward with it, which he did. Something that I was thinking is that what if it was this Dr. George who she was obsessed with, who she was not even obsessed, like in love with. She wanted him to love her back because that's something her family never did, I'm sure. And what if this Dr. George is the one who forged the letters to himself, from Starr, to make it look like, it was just a suicide after he had killed her to get her to stop. I don't know, that's something that I definitely thought of while rereading all of this to you guys, and I think that could definitely be it. However, it could also be a suicide. This poor girl did not have the best life, the best mindset, and I truly feel so horrible that this was her life and it ended so quickly, and she could never have that, rebound in life where she overcame that darkness and that sadness and got a better life out of it, which I so wish she could have experienced. But I am happy to tell her story because even if she had such a dark life, hopefully I can bring some light to her story. So once again, this is a collab with Mollie Westbrook. I'll have her video linked down below. If you are new to my channel, I want to let you know that I am completely passionate about telling these stories. It is my one true passion, I think, other than writing, and I would love your support. And all you have to do is subscribe and watch these videos, maybe give them a thumbs up and a comment, and it means the world. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.